A woman is about to stand up in a courtroom and prove that her mother, who is alive, who is sitting right there, could not understand what she was signing. She chose the date herself. It's the last afternoon she remembers her mother laughing. If she's right, the house her mother signed away comes home. If she's wrong, her brother keeps it. So she needs one specific Tuesday in March to be the day the lights went out. I'll tell you where I stand before we start. I think she's the good one, the one who shows up, who does the ugly, thankless work while everyone else gets to be warm. Watch her. See how long you stay on her side. I'm the Sperry. Sit with me for this one.
The lawyer asked me for a date, and I gave him one before I understood what I was agreeing to carry. He had been explaining the rule the way you explain a thing you have said too many times to hear anymore. The deed stood. My mother had signed the house over to my brother, and a signed deed is a wall. There was one way through it. If I could show that on the day she signed, she had not been able to understand what the deed did, what it did to her house, to her, to the years after, then the signing did not hold. Not that she was forgetful. Not that she had gone downhill in the months since. That on the day she signed in that chair she could not grasp what she was doing. He needed a date, not a season, not around then. A day. And I heard myself say it. A Tuesday in March, the 9th, I thought. And then I was sure. I was sure because I could see it. That was the trouble. The day I had just handed a lawyer as the day my mother stopped being herself was a day I could still hear. We had been at the hardware store, the two of us, and she had laughed at something I have since lost. The joke is gone, only the laugh survived. And she had folded the receipt into her coat pocket the way she folded everything in halves, and I had thought, walking her to the car, that I would remember this. I did not know I was going to need it as evidence. I did not know I would spend 3 weeks trying to prove that the woman laughing beside me was already gone.
Oh, that's the day she picked? The one where her mother is happy?
The house was the thing at stake, and I want to be honest about the house, because it was not nothing, and it was not everything. It was the house my mother had lived in for 31 years. It was the house she still moved through in the dark without touching the walls, where the doorframe by the kitchen carried our heights in pencil, hers and mine and Emmett's. 30 years of pencil, painted over twice, and still there, if you knew where the light hit. It was the last thing that was hers in the plain, deep way a house can be yours. Not an asset, a habit, a body you have worn so long you forget it is separate from you. And it belonged on paper to Emmett now. Which meant that if Emmett needed money, or Emmett's life turned the way lives turn, a business, a divorce, a debt, the ordinary weather of a life, the house could be sold or borrowed against or simply gone, and my mother would be a guest in the only place that had ever been hers. Emmett had not said he would do any of that. I never said he had. I said the deed made it possible, and possible was enough to keep me awake, because I had spent my whole life being the one who lay awake over what was possible while everyone else slept on what was fine.
I know that feeling. The one who lies awake so everyone else can sleep. I'm on her side already. Fair warning.
The hearing was set for a Thursday a month out. I had weeks. I had a mother who was, that afternoon on the phone, entirely herself, asking whether I'd eaten, telling me the cardinal was back at the feeder. And I had a date I had promised to prove, about a woman who kept picking up the phone and being my mother. I should tell you how I loved her, because it matters to what came after, and because a court never asked. The first time it frightened me was earlier that spring, before she signed the deed. By the time I reached her, she was pale and unsteady, holding the edge of the counter like the floor had tilted. The pill count suggested she had taken her morning blood pressure medicine twice, but she could not tell me, or the emergency room staff, whether she had already taken the first dose or when, and that was what the discharge note recorded.
God. Okay, that's real. That is not nothing.
I sat beside her while they monitored her until she was steady enough to go home that afternoon. That was when I took charge of the bottles and started filling her organizer myself, and told myself I was only being careful. 3 weeks before the lawyer, it nearly happened again, and this time I was standing right there. I had been filling her pill organizer, the plastic one with the little doors, Sunday through Saturday, and I had set the bottle beside it while I worked. That morning's compartment was already empty, but she picked up the bottle and tipped another pill into her palm. She said easily, "I take it in the morning." And she was right, she did, every morning, and the empty compartment said she already had that day. She just did not remember. I took it out of her palm before she could swallow it. It was the second time in a month she had lost track of the same morning dose. So I took the rest. If the organizer was not enough, I would make it enough. A locking one, the kind that only opened at the hour it was set for, and alarms on her phone, and a call to the pharmacy to flag her file. I did every single thing right, and I did not once ask her if she wanted me to. I want to be clear that I was right. I also want to be clear about what right looked like from where she stood, which was a daughter who arrived, decided she could not be trusted with her own morning, and took the mornings.
You're already deciding she went too far. Hold on, there have been 2 scares with the same morning pill in 1 month.
It did not stop at the pills. Once I had the pills, I saw everything else. The stove she left on under an empty kettle. The checkbook with 3 entries for the same water bill. The front door she'd started leaving unlocked because the deadbolt stuck and she couldn't remember which way it turned. Every one of those was real, and every one of them I fixed by taking it, until there was a version of my mother's life that ran smoothly and none of it ran through her hands. I made her safe the way you make a child safe, and I told myself the 2 things were the same, safe and managed, and if you had asked me that spring, I could not have told you where one ended and the other started.
Every one of those dangers was real. That's what makes this hard. A real danger never tells you when to stop.
Emmett was there for some of it. Emmett was there the way Weather is there. He would sit at the table and make her laugh and let her tell the cardinal story twice without correcting the second telling, and it looked, I will admit, like a gift. Like he had the thing I didn't, the ease, the ability to sit with our mother and simply enjoy her instead of auditing her. What I noticed and said nothing about was that when the pharmacy needed a signature or the insurance denied the refill or someone had to sit on hold for 50 minutes with a company that seemed to do it on purpose, Emmett was not the one holding the phone. He never once held the phone. He got to be easy because I was there being hard. His ease was built on the back of my hardness, and neither of us ever said so. And the world looked at the 2 of us and saw a warm son and a difficult daughter. And the world was not wrong about what it saw. It was only wrong about what it cost.
And where is the brother in all this? Sitting down, making her laugh, holding none of the phone calls. I don't trust the easy one.
She was warmer to him. I saw it, and I filed it where I filed everything that year, under the illness. Of course she was warmer to the one who didn't count her pills. She was confused, I told myself. It wasn't a preference. It was a symptom. If it was a symptom, the deed was void, and the house came back. If it was a preference, the deed stood. I needed it to be a symptom. I want you to see that I needed it, because a person who needs a particular answer is not a reliable judge of the evidence. And I was the one gathering the evidence.
I understand why. I want it to be the illness too.
The chart notes almost sank me on the first read. I had pulled 11 months of them. The internist, the neurologist, the notes the nurse practitioner typed after each visit. And I sat at my kitchen table reading my mother reduced to abbreviations. The word I needed was there, but it was the wrong word by exactly 1 degree. The notes said amnesia, memory impairment. They did not say what I needed a judge to hear, which was that on a Tuesday in March, she could not understand what she was doing when she did it. Forgetting a pill is not the same as not knowing you own a house. The gap between those two things was the whole case, and the chart lived in the gap.
Wait, amnesia, but couldn't understand a deed? That's the whole difference? Apparently, that's the whole house.
I read those notes for 2 nights at my kitchen table with the light too low, the way you read a thing you are hoping will say something it does not say. I highlighted, I made a column of dates, I built a little timeline out of my mother's decline the way I had built timelines for work, for arguments, for every problem I had ever managed my way through. And somewhere in the second night I caught myself doing it and felt sick. Because the problem I was managing my way through was whether my mother had a mind, and I was good at it. And being good at it was the thing she could not stand about me. I had the receipt. She never threw a slip away, and I had been the one emptying her coat pocket since the spring. So I had it, the date on it, printed, unarguable. What I did not have was what the date meant. A receipt proves a purchase. It does not prove a mind. I could put my mother in that store on that afternoon, and I could not yet put anything in her head.
She may be able to prove the date. I'm wondering something else. How much of a person's life should anyone be allowed to reconstruct without them?
So the date was real and empty. I needed someone who had watched her that day and could say what they saw. The clerk at the hardware store remembered her. People remembered my mother. She was the kind of woman who got remembered. He was maybe 60, aprons and reading glasses, and when I described the day, he nodded before I finished. She'd bought a box of the same furnace filters she'd bought 2 days before, he said. Same size, same brand. He'd noticed because it was a slow week, and she'd been in twice, and the second time she'd been so pleased with herself for remembering the size that he hadn't the heart to tell her she'd already got them. She paid. She folded the receipt. She was, he said, in a good mood.
She bought the same filters twice and was proud she remembered the size. That's the saddest thing I've heard today.
I had it. Not the case, but the piece I'd been missing. The case was the hospital afternoon and the chart notes and a year of small failures. The filters were smaller than that. They were only the first thing I could set down on the exact day, the repeat she didn't know was a repeat, on the 9th. And then he said the other thing, the thing I did not want, and he said it kindly, which was worse. He said she'd told him that day that her daughter would want to return them and she wasn't going to let her. Said it laughing, said she didn't want the fuss. And he'd liked her for it, this clerk. He'd liked that she wasn't going to be fussed over. And I watched him decline, gently, in real time, to think of my mother as a woman who didn't know her own mind. He would give me the filters. He would not give me helpless. I took the part about the filters and left the rest. I told myself the rest was the illness talking, a confused woman's throwaway line. I had what I came for. I did not look too hard at the part where my mother, on the day I was going to prove she was gone, had predicted exactly what I would do and told the clerk she wasn't going to let me.
You caught that too, didn't you? Her mother predicted exactly what Frances would do and told the clerk she wasn't going to let her. I don't know what that means yet. Neither does she.
Emmett's lawyer filed a motion, and for a day I let myself believe Emmett was the villain, because it was so much easier than the alternative. The motion asked the court to order an independent examination of my mother. A neutral writ, they called it. What it meant was another afternoon of a stranger asking my mother what year it was and who the president was, and to remember 3 words and repeat them back in 5 minutes. The small humiliations, the ones that made her hands go still in her lap. I had watched her sit through them. I knew what they took out of her. And here was Emmett's side asking for another on the record. And I thought, he'll put her through anything to keep the house.
There he is. One more test for a frightened woman, and the house stays with him. That looks exactly like what I was afraid of.
I said that to him in the parking lot, more or less. And Emmett didn't get loud. Emmett said the thing I have not been able to put down since. He said he wasn't arguing she was sharp. He knew she was slipping. He wasn't a fool. What he could not stand, he said, was me, the way I had taken every bad hour she had and stacked them into a case that her wanting anything didn't count. You've made her mind the whole question, he said. I'm just asking somebody who isn't you to answer it. That was the first crack. I drove home telling myself it was a lawyer's line in my brother's mouth, but I kept turning it over at the lights, and it didn't sound like a lawyer's line. Lawyers don't know which hours were the bad ones. It sounded like a brother who had been in the house more than I gave him credit for, watching me from the easy chair I resented him for sitting in, and who had decided, some time ago, and without telling me, that the dangerous one in this family was not the woman forgetting her filters. It was the woman with the highlighter and the timeline, who loved so hard and so precisely that she had turned her own mother into a case to be won. I did not accept that driving home. I want to be clear that I rejected it. I just could not make it stop being the truth.
Oh, that does not sound like a man fighting for a house. It sounds like a son defending his mother's right to have wanted something. I called him the easy one a minute ago. I think I owe him a second look.
The court-ordered examiner came back equivocal, which, in a case like mine, is another word for lost. He would say she had deficits. He would not say she couldn't have understood the deed that day because he had not examined her then, and no one had thought to test her on the one afternoon it mattered. The amnesia note sat in his report like a stone. I was going to lose on a word.
She's going to lose on a word. Amnesia instead of couldn't understand. That's the whole house, hanging on the difference.
So I built the date out of pieces. The hospital record put a documented episode of the same confusion on the calendar that spring. The receipt put her in the store on the day itself. The clerk put the forgotten purchase on the receipt's date. The nurse practitioner, when I finally got her to say it plainly, agreed that the lapse the clerk described was consistent with the impairment her own notes had been tracking that spring. She would not swear to a single afternoon, and I stopped needing her to. It was not one clean fact. It was a handful of ordinary things that only meant something stacked together, and stacked together they were enough to let a judge find a Tuesday. I could win. I remember the moment I knew I could win, and I remember that it did not feel the way I'd expected. I had my date, which meant we were going to a hearing, which meant my mother was going to be in the room. The night before, prepping the clerk's testimony, I heard the word. I was going over what he'd say, and he mentioned, offhand, not knowing he was handing me a live wire, that my mother had used a particular word about me more than once over the years he'd known her. Not that spring, for years. The word was manage. My daughter likes to manage me. He'd heard it more than once, going back further than any doctor's note, further than any decline. Just the word. Not the house. Not Emmett. Not why. Only that my mother had a word for me and had had it a long time, since before there was anything wrong with her memory at all.
And now you're doing the thing she won't let herself do. Lining that word up against the deed to see if it fits. So am I.
I told myself it was nothing. A word. Everybody's mother has a word. I did not let myself do the thing you are already doing, which is line the word up against the deed and see whether it fit. I went to bed. I went to the hearing. I went because the only alternative to proving she was confused was believing she had meant it, and I was not ready to hold that. So I picked up the thing I could hold, which was the case. Here's what the hearing was, under the oath and the water glasses. 2 moves, and then my mother. The first move was mine, and it worked. The hospital afternoon, the receipt, the clerk, the nurse practitioner, the pieces stacking toward the 9th. The judge listened the way judges do, and I could see the date landing. Could see her being persuaded that on that Tuesday, my mother had not had the mind the law requires to give away a house. The wall was coming down. I had done it. The judge said one thing that I have kept. She said, almost as an aside, that she wanted the record clear that whatever my mother was able to do in this courtroom today told her nothing about that Tuesday. That a person can sit and speak and still, on a day months gone, have been unable to understand what she signed. Present and gone are not opposites.
Present and gone at the same time. That sounds impossible until you've loved someone who could be both.
She said. I wrote it down. I did not yet know she was describing my whole family. The second move was Emmett's, and it was quieter than mine, and it did more. His lawyer put on two people, an old friend of my mother's from the church and the woman who'd cut her hair for 20 years, and neither of them talked about that Tuesday at all. They talked about before. The friend remembered a lunch years back, no cloud on my mother anywhere, where she'd said the thing plainly over soup, that her son let her be and her daughter loved her like a project. The hairdresser remembered it differently and the same. A woman in her chair, sharp as a tack, telling her across the mirror what she planned to do about the house someday and why, laughing about it, the way you laugh about a thing you have already decided and made peace with. Neither of them said what the plan was. Emmett's lawyer was careful about that. They only established that it was old, that my mother had a settled, unconfused, long-standing opinion about her two children, and that it predated every note in every chart, every stove, every pill she had lost track of. That whatever came out of her mouth next could not be handed to a bad spring. The spring had not invented it.
So it's older than the illness. Whatever she says next did not begin with the decline. I did not see that coming, and I'm starting to think I should have.
And then the last thing, which was not a move at all, because it was my mother, and she was allowed to speak, and she did. She was having a clear hour. They happen. That was the cruelty of it, that she could be handed the clearest hour in a month at the exact moment it would cost me most. She did not give a speech. She did not explain a diagnosis or a deed or which of her children was the good one. She said one thing, and she said it to the room and not to me, in the flat, plain voice she used for true things. She said, Emmett lets me be. Francis runs me. And then, about the house, only, I gave it to the one who lets me be. That was all. That was the whole of it. The impairment was real. I had proven it, and it was real, and it was not why she signed. She had signed for a reason older than her illness and clearer than any afternoon, and I had spent 3 weeks and every favor I had proving the one thing that was true and beside the point. I could win the date, I could not win the answer. There was no answer to win. She had told the truth in 7 words and gone quiet, and the quiet had my name in it.
There it is. And I have to be straight with you, because I told you at the top I was on her side and suspicious of him. I was half wrong. Not about the danger. The danger was real. She was right about the pills. About Emmett. I called him the one who did nothing, and I missed what his not taking over meant to her. The impairment was true, and it was never the reason. She can win the date and lose the answer, and she just did.
When the judge accepted the date, my body let go before I could stop it. I felt it in my shoulders first, the loosening, the animal relief of having won, and it lasted about as long as it took me to turn my head and see my mother folding her hands in her lap, and then the shame came up my throat like water. Because what I had won was proof that my mother was impaired. And some part of me, the part I do not like, was glad of the impairment, because the impairment was the only thing that let me undo what she'd done. You're not allowed to be glad your mother is sick. I was, for 1 second, in a courtroom, and I have not told anyone that until now.
Part of you is relieved she won. Part of you is sick that you're relieved. Yeah, me too.
The deed could be set aside. I had won the power to reach back and erase the act that carried the one clear wish she had ever made plain. The broken signing, not the wish behind it. And I had won something I had not let myself count, proof that on that day my mother had not been able to make that decision for herself. Once a court agreed to that, someone was going to have to decide for her, and the obvious someone was me, the daughter who was already deciding everything else.
There's the trap closing. To save her, she had to prove her mother couldn't make that decision, and then assume the deciding would fall to her. The one thing her mother signed the house away to escape.
That was the thing, sitting there, that turned my stomach. I had spent 3 weeks proving my mother needed a manager. I was the manager. Being managed was the exact thing she had given the house away to escape. So I did the only thing I could find that was not either taking the house or pretending she'd been fine. I let the deed be set aside. I would not stand up and argue my mother had known what she was doing when I had 3 weeks of my own work proving she hadn't. I would not let a broken deed stand just because I'd lost my nerve about what breaking it meant. The court set it aside. The house came back to my mother's name, and then there was the other proceeding, the one that had been moving alongside all of this on its own track. Because proving she couldn't manage a deed in March did not by itself make anyone her guardian now. That was a separate question, with its own hearing, its own notice, its own doctors, and its own lawyer appointed to sit beside my mother and answer only to her. A conservator was appointed for her estate, not me. I asked that it not be me, and I meant it. And into that proceeding, I brought the last thing I ever thought I would file. I petitioned the court to give the house to Emmett.
Wait, she did what? She fought all this way to undo her mother's choice, and now she's choosing to honor it.
Not to hand it to him myself. I had no right to, and I found that I did not want the right, which surprised me, because wanting the right had been the whole shape of my life until that week. I asked the court to do it, under the rule that lets a court carry out what a person would have chosen if she still could, weighing what she had wanted, what she had said over and over for years, to a clerk and a hairdresser and a friend over soup and a room full of strangers under oath. I asked them to give her a life in the house for as long as she lived, so that no debt of Emmett's and no turn of his fortune could ever put her out of it. The one protection I still believed in, folded now inside the thing she'd asked for instead of on top of it. And the house itself, after, to my brother. A life estate to her, the rest to him. I asked for the exact arrangement I had spent 3 weeks in every favor I owned trying to tear down, and I asked for it in writing, with my name on the bottom, so that there would be a record somewhere that the daughter who managed everything had once, at the end, arranged the one thing that cost her and gained her nothing.
It wasn't the house she gave up. It was the deciding. For Frances, that may have been the harder thing to surrender.
It did not happen in the courtroom that day, the way things happen in the stories. It happened weeks later, in a hearing I have half forgotten, in flat language, with my mother's lawyer nodding, and a judge signing, and no one crying. The court found it was what she would have wanted, because she had told everyone but me. And it was done. And I had won everything the law had to give me and used all of it to hand my brother the house and my mother the last word. I took nothing. That was not nobility. There was nothing left that I could have taken and still been able to live in my own skin.
She fought to bring it back, and then asked the court to give it to him.
She lives there still. She may live there until she dies, which is what I bought her, if you can call it buying when you pay with being right. She doesn't remember the hearing. I've decided that's a mercy, and left it alone. Last week she wanted to move the feeder to the other side of the yard, where I happen to know the cardinals won't come, where the light is wrong, where it is a small, plain mistake. And I opened my mouth to tell her, and then I closed it, and I went out and moved the feeder to the wrong side of the yard, because it is her yard, and her feeder, and her mistake to make.
She knows the feeder is in the wrong place, and she moves it anyway.
She stood at the window a while, watching the place where the birds weren't going to be, and she said, not to me, that it was better there. And I said, it was better there. And it wasn't, and it was hers. And I have finally learned the difference, which is the whole thing my mother tried to teach me with a house. And I was too busy managing to hear. I go over on Sundays now. I fill the organizer, because that part was never wrong. The danger was real. The danger stays real. And there is a kind of love that is only in the small, unglamorous doing of a thing. And I will not give it up. But I have learned to do the doing without taking the deciding. I ask her more than I tell her now. I lose more arguments on purpose than I ever thought a person could stand to lose. Some days she knows me completely, and some days she calls me by my aunt's name. And on both kinds of days, I am trying to be the daughter who lets her be a person, which is the daughter she wanted all along, and which I could only become after I had proved, in a court of law, at the cost of everything, that I had never once been her. I proved she was gone. She wasn't gone. She was telling me the entire time exactly where she was.
Here's where I land. And I've already been wrong once tonight, so take it with that. Frances loved her mother. The question is whether a love that will not take no for an answer is still love, or control saying, I'm only helping. I called Frances the good one, and treated Emmett like he was working an angle. I made both of them simpler than they were. So when someone you love is no longer safe making every decision alone, how much do you take over? And which choices must remain theirs? Leave room to be wrong. I'll see you next time.